Well, hello again, folks. I'm here to make my second video for the day, and wanted to follow up on the first one, which was about narcissism. And I talked about things that characterize narcissists. I talked about 6 things, and there are more, but 6 things that characterize them, and these are things that parallel the characteristics of Satan himself. So that's what I went into, really an overview of what narcissism is, where it came from, and sort of the most key signature characteristics. And then I went a step farther at the very end, and I talked about how these characteristics overlap with Satan himself. So that's what I want to pick up on. If you haven't seen the previous video, go back and watch it. But if you have, let's go forward and talk a little bit deeper here. So I want to tell you straight up, and I'm always going to do that on this channel, every time I talk about narcissism, this is a spiritual problem. Narcissism is a spiritual problem. Is it a mental disorder? Yeah, it's a mental disorder. But it's inseparable. You cannot separate the mental aspects of a person from the spiritual aspects of a person. Anyone of faith knows that. So I'm going to get into some things I think will make better sense of this. But a lot of us get hung up on whether or not a person is a diagnosed narcissist. Do they have NPD? Have they been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder? It's the wrong thing to worry about. First of all, as we know, and most people who study this know, narcissists don't typically go to counseling. They're not going to go see a therapist because they don't think anything's wrong with them. If they do, they might just go there for fun, to torture the person they're with, or to torture the therapist, or because they have a court order to do something, to go see a counselor. But they're not going to go there, spill their heart out, introspect, and make progress, because they don't change. They don't do that. Narcissists don't do that. So it doesn't really matter if they have been diagnosed. So let's just say that they do go there. Most counselors don't have a clue how to really treat narcissism because there's no treatment for it. They don't change. Again, it's a spiritual disorder. That's the problem that people don't recognize. So even if they go there, even if they see a licensed counselor or therapist who could really help them, maybe they specialize in narcissistic personality disorder, making a diagnosis is hard. Even those people have a difficult time doing it. So a lot of figures are thrown around that maybe between 1% and 5% of the population are narcissists, but they're typically talking about people who have been diagnosed. And for those reasons I just mentioned, it doesn't really matter. You know, one of the things I do like about Dr. Romani, if you ever looked at her research, she doesn't see it from the spiritual side really either, which is the downfall, but she does a really good job on the clinical side. And she says, look, it's not really about whether or not the person is diagnosed with NPD, for the reasons I already mentioned. What's really relevant is narcissism is a personality style or personality type. It's not a diagnosis as much as it really is a personality style. So it's all on a spectrum. How much narcissism does a person have? Everybody has some to some degree. So maybe you're on the very low end, you have few narcissistic traits, and means you're probably a really good person. And if you're on the other side of the spectrum, you have a lot of narcissistic traits, which means you're a devil on 2 legs. And in between there, you've got a lot of shades, more or less, more or less, more or less. Okay? So what happens really is, in a spiritual sense, if you want to put it this way, the less narcissistic traits you have, the less you're like the devil, and the more you're like Christ. The more narcissistic traits you have, the more you're like the devil, and the more you're not like Christ. Or the less you're like Christ, I should say. And there's all these shades of gray in between. So a diagnosis of this this little tip at the end of people who are just bursting with narcissistic traits doesn't really hardly matter. If it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck. It's a duck. So it's a personality style to begin with, not so much a diagnosis. People are way too hung up on, do they have NPD? Are they diagnosed with NPD? Doesn't really matter. How do they behave? So I'm going to go here now a step further, though. I'm going to tell you why we don't need to worry about this mental disorder part of it to begin with. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. Because the things they do don't involve brain impairment. They don't really involve, yes, there's childhood issues. There's almost always childhood issues with the narcissist. They are the golden child who was privileged and given everything and faced no repercussions and became really entitled. Or maybe they were the one who was neglected and not given assurance and validation. That's a part to play. It's just a part, because we all grow up with those sorts of things. What happens is the narcissist makes decisions along the way. Decisions. They choose to behave in certain ways. They choose to cultivate manipulation tactics and blame shifting and all sorts of, they cultivate those things and become more and further on the spectrum and more evil. But let me tell you, in case you're wondering, really, is this a spiritual problem? Yes, it is. And let me tell you why. Intent. They do things so oftentimes with intent and forethought. Okay? Let me show you some examples of that. First one I got here is pushing boundaries. If you have any familiarity with a narcissist, especially if you've been in a relationship with one, you know that even from the earliest stages, where they're love bombing you, or the euphoric stage, whatever you want to call it, where you are everything in the world, you're the best person, you're the best thing that's ever existed, and they're going to build you up and validate you in every way. Even then, if you really think about it, they're pushing boundaries. They're going to talk about an ex, maybe. Then they're going to talk about that ex maybe a little bit more. And if it's still not bothering you, maybe they're going to talk about that ex just a little bit more. Until finally, got him. That got a reaction. Okay, so that's a boundary. That's how far I can push him. That's how far I can push her. Okay, I got it. Or they're just doing little things like that all the time. Bringing individuals up, and I'll talk about this more in a minute with triangulation. But they're always doing these little things to test. Another example of pushing boundaries, maybe I just won't respond to his text for about, 3 or 4 hours. Just won't respond. See how he does with that. Oh, he seems to be okay. Well, maybe next time it'll be 5 hours. Next time it'll be 7 or 8. Maybe all day. I won't. I'll just see how he does. And then when he finally asks, what's the deal? I say, I didn't know. I was just busy. But they found your boundary. Or they pushed your boundary. See how far you'd go. See how far they could go until you got frustrated. Pushing boundaries. Another one, silent treatment and ghosting. Silent treatment where they just don't talk to you for a period of time. Act like you don't exist. You can be sitting next to them. Silent treatments. It's notorious to be sitting next to them in a car or at their house, and they're just going to act like you don't exist. Ghosting would be, maybe you've got plans and they just don't show up. They blow you off like you weren't even there. Both connected, though, as you can see. And both of these things, silent treatment and ghosting, are major weapons in a narcissist arsenal. They use this to just bludgeon you, just beat you over the head. Because the worst thing that can happen when you're in love with someone or deeply care about them, the worst thing is when that person acts like you don't even exist. Yeah, we're right here next to each other, but I'm here all by myself. There's nothing worse than that feeling of being with someone but alone with that person. And they are masters at it. So imagine that takes forethought. You don't subconsciously or accidentally treat somebody like they don't exist. You don't ignore a text message for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours or all day. You don't sit there and see someone calling on your phone. Have you ever done that? Just not known that someone's trying to get a hold of you for 2 or 3 days or however long, even 2 or 3 hours. Very rare. Maybe if you were in an extreme situation or extremely busy or in meetings you just couldn't get out of. But you're not going to ignore people. They do, because they do it intentionally. So it's not subconscious. It's not just, this brain disorder took over and I'm a robot doing this. No, they choose to give you silent treatment. They choose to do that and abuse you by ghosting you and other things. Gaslighting. Big one. Let me give you an example. First of all, gaslighting is basically anything they're going to do to make you question your sense of reality. That up isn't up, down isn't down. That you just don't really know anything about anything. You're just in this dizzy, this fog mentality. That's what gaslighting is. Make you question everything. They do that ultimately so they can have control. I'll give you an example. Give you a personal one. So one time, borrowed the narcissist keys and to unlock a door at the house, at her house, and unlocked it, got the stuff out that I needed to get out, put the keys back in her purse. Same thing. I know for a fact I did it. There's no reason I wouldn't if I remember it vividly. About a couple hours later, all of a sudden, Brian, I really need those keys. You do? You don't hardly ever use those keys, but okay. Well, they're in your purse. I put them back. They're not in here. They're not in here. I looked. They have to be. I put them right back. Sure enough, they weren't in there. So guess what happens? I get to run around the rest of the day trying to find these keys that I know I put in her purse while she mocks me, ridicules me, criticizes me. And then guess what happens later on? A frantic Brian finally finds these keys in a book bag of mine, in a pocket, an obscure pocket. I would never have put them there. Now, at the time, I was in such a frenzy and I was so disoriented that I thought to myself, darn, maybe I did put them there. But I knew in the back of my mind I didn't. This is gaslighting. They'll take keys and hide them so you don't know where they are. Take a wallet and hide it. Then they'll criticize you the whole time. You always misplace things. You never know where things are. You're so disorganized. Imagine a person who will hide things from you just so they can watch you squirm and make fun of you and ridicule you and make you doubt everything about reality. Gaslighting. They love to do it. But you know what? That's not done by accident either. It takes intentionality to gaslight someone. 4. Triangulation. Triangulation. One of the best ever. Give you another personal example after I describe it. Triangulation is when someone pulls a third party, person or object or memory or something into the mix in order to create problems with the person that they're with. Pulling something else in to invoke jealousy or some emotional response. Triangulation, get it? There's 3 things involved. They pull something else in, a third party. Good example, sitting at a diner. Maybe your partner looks over, and this may or may not have happened to me, looks over at a table with 2 men that we don't know, and just gives one of these little smirky eyes. I don't know that person. She doesn't know that person. I'm sitting there stunned. What just happened? Why did you do that? I'll tell you why they did it. Triangulation. Because by doing that, she knew that it would invoke jealousy and confusion in me. Or, hey, this could be another example. Hey, I used to date a person with your name. I guess that makes you a little mini-me of that person. I used to date a guy named Brian. I guess you're Brian number 2. Hey, I'd never date a person named Alan. Who'd name their kid Alan? Oh, wait, I did date an Alan. Just forgot. They didn't forget. These things are done. Triangulation. Triangulation. They're done to disrupt you. Oh, I was at the grocery store earlier today, and this guy just followed me around the whole time. Just thought I was good looking. Invokes jealousy. Invokes a problem. They do it all the time, and it's intentional. You don't accidentally bring up the name of an ex from 5 or 6 years ago, and oopsie, I forgot I didn't date somebody like that. Doesn't happen. Forethought, intentionality. Reactive abuse, another one. So they will often treat you so badly over so long a period of time that finally everyone has a breaking point. And I have patience for days with stuff like this, believe it or not, even though I know that I seem like I'm kind of like hostile in these videos sometimes. I'm not at all. I'm just very serious about narcissism. That aside, there's so many different times where they will push you, they'll push those boundaries, like I said, and they'll get you to that point where you have to react. Your patience is worn thin, it's down to the nub, and you're finally going to be like, oh, enough. Now, hopefully you don't react the way they do, but any little thing, even just finally raising your voice, reactive abuse. But guess what they're waiting to do oftentimes? With their trusty third arm, the smartphone, they're waiting right there so you can get upset and they can go, click, look at him, he's blowing up. Look, this is the stuff I deal with, guys. He's so unreasonable. He's so unreasonable. What they don't tell everyone who sees that video is all the torture they put you through to get there. The triangulation, the other people who were brought in, the times that they criticized you to oblivion and you finally just snapped. Yep. You know what, though? Reactive abuse is not caused by accident. They intentionally beat you and bludgeon you to the point where you have to get frustrated because everyone has a breaking point. Here's a bonus one. This is the last one, and it's a bonus I'll throw in there. Hoovering and their reappearance. You know what a hoover is? If you don't, just means that the narcissist comes back into your life. After they break up with you, you break up with them, whatever you want to call it, they'll often come back. And they'll do it just to somehow, some way enter your life, have you there as an energy source, but largely just to kind of put you through more abuse and beat you down. Largely. But somehow they know when to do it. It's miraculous. It's amazing. They know when you're having a bad day. You can have no contact with this person. Be no contact, no communication. They just know this person's going through a rough stretch. How do they know that? How do they know that? Because it's spiritual. Guys, it's spiritual. They are operating on a different, it's not earthly level. It's not because they're just that good of investigators. They are good investigators. But they know things they shouldn't be able to know sometimes, like your state of being. This is the perfect time for me to hoover that person. He's down. Because their demonic minions are feeding this into their mind all the time. They know. Another one is the appearance to begin with. Narcissists are notorious. Ask anyone who's dealt with this for coming and approaching you at just an opportune time. You know, when it says that in the Bible that Satan tempted Jesus in the wilderness, and then that he left for a more opportune time. Narcissists know all about this. They do the same thing because it's a spiritual condition. It's a spiritual situation. So they'll show up in your life. Maybe you got divorced recently. Maybe you went through a horrible sickness for the rest of that year and were out of sorts and down and vulnerable like you've never been. Guess what? Here comes that narcissist. They're in your life, buddy, because they knew you were down and you were vulnerable. How do they know that? It's not a mental disorder. It's spiritual. Everything, guys, that I just mentioned, gaslighting, pushing boundaries, triangulation, knowing when to hoover, when to come back, when to appear to begin with, these things involve intentionality, forethought. They know exactly what they're doing, when to push buttons, how far they can push buttons, and they're constantly trying to test these things all the time. So guys, this is a spiritual problem. We talk about narcissism, but at the end of the day, what really is it? Narcissism is evil. It's evil. It just provides us a backstory of this guy named Narcissus and people who are in love with themselves or self-absorbed, but they do all these terribly evil things. That's what it boils down to. Like that spectrum I talked about at the beginning. The less narcissism you have in you, the more goodness you have in you. The more narcissism you have in you, the less goodness you have in you. Because narcissism is evil. That's what it really is. So I want to close this video, but I want you guys to understand, think about the things I told you. Think about the gaslighting and hiding keys and bringing other people into the situation and poking, pushing, prodding, looking for your breaking point and being ready with their cell phone if need be to record you if you hit the breaking point. All of these things and so much more. This does not happen just subconsciously because their mind just makes it happen. Just poof. They don't know they're doing it. Of course they know they're doing it. That's why narcissism, guys, is a spiritual condition. Worrying about whether they're diagnosed with some sort of toxic personality disorder or anything else doesn't really matter. Look at their behavior. If they're evil, if they're dark, that's all that matters. And narcissists are incredibly dark and incredibly evil. It's not. It's not a mental thing, guys. It's spiritual. That's the foundation of it. It's spiritual. So thanks for watching this video. I hope it was useful to you. If you want to, go back and check my other video out on narcissism. I plan on doing some more. If you have questions, comments, put them down below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you do enjoy it, just keep up with my work. Thanks a lot, guys. It's a really important conversation. I hope it's meaning something to you. So until next time, God bless.